right.
How did the Bielski Brigade affect the outcome of World War II?
There's a story that says that the Bielski family, my grandfather and the brothers, blew up a bridge that was supplying, it was a bridge that was supplying guns, ammunition, tanks to the front line. And they blew it up and they held off the Nazis, the Germans, for 24, 48 hours. And there are people that said that because of what they did, it helped to stop the war because they couldn't they couldn't get all those supplies, resupply the Nazi against, to help them fight against, everybody else. So they think it was, again, it depends what you ask, but they think it was a very, important part of what happened to help end the war. It wasn't like they stopped it, but they actually led them to help, cut off that supply chain to them. And that, again, that's part of the underground. That's part of the, and again, they did, and they were ghosts. They would do certain things, and then they would disappear. And they would, make sure that people wouldn't say anything either. They would tell them, they'd kill people that turned Jews in, and they'd hang them and cut their heads off and say, put signs around their necks and go, if you turn a Jew in, this is what's going to happen to you and your family. And it was incredibly brutal, but it helped stop people from turning the Jews in and helping them able to survive. So that's what they ended up doing.
Wow.
So I think it was pretty significant, but again, it's all who you ask. I mean, it's all, the stories that we heard is pretty incredible stories.
Can I, sorry, I want to interject for the...
Sure.
So, again, we've only seen half the movie, and we saw the part where the farmer who helped them at the beginning, where he was killed with a sign around his neck to deter other people from helping Jews.
Correct.
But what you just saying, I think, was that this was happening on the resistance side.
That's
too.
correct.
Here's what's happened if you don't help the Jews.
Absolutely. No, that's saying that if you turn the Jews in, this would go against farmers who, you had the people that were helping, and then you had the people that were turning the Jews in. So a little bit on both sides, but the truth of the matter is that my grandfather and the brothers would go against the people that were turning the Jews in, and they would end up doing that to stop them from doing it. And there's some, I'm not going to ruin it for you, but there are some scenes in there that are absolutely 100% true that have happened in the movie, and you think to yourself, oh my God, it's pretty intense, pretty intense movie to watch. So.
What do you think we can learn from your grandfather's actions that relate to today's world?
I think about that a lot. I think you have to be vigilant. I think you have to, part of the museum, which is what I enjoy coming here and doing things, is they teach kids to not be bystanders, not be bullied, not watch bullies bully, to interject and to step in and to do things. And albeit they may be small little things that are happening, the more you do it, the more it becomes a normal thing. Kids are a byproduct of what they're taught and how they're parented, and it's important for them to understand that they can make a difference in life. Use the lessons of the Holocaust and my grandfather to let them know that my grandfather was an uneducated. He was educated, but he didn't have a college degree, didn't have a high school degree. He was very smart, spoke multiple languages, self-taught. Was a chameleon. He would learn German, learn whatever he needed to fit in. And it's important to let people know that, kids especially, that you can do whatever you set your mind to, and you can make a difference in this world. And you have to be vigilant in things, and you can't be afraid to stand up and ask questions, and can't be afraid to, if things are bad, to say something, and it's nobody likes to be out in the public, and nobody likes to, it's a hard thing to do. It's a hard thing for people to look up to somebody else or to stand up for what you believe. It's a very, very difficult thing to get up and you know, to do public speaking, for instance, to get up in front of a class and to talk. It's very, very incredibly hard to do. And it happens just through practice. So you teach people, you teach kids to take one step at a time, small things, open up doors for people, say things, you know, be interactive, come here and do an interview. I mean, it's a very hard thing to even be on that side to do the relevant, you know, the information, get the information to actually ask questions. It's a hard thing for you to do, and I appreciate that. So it's relevant in today's world because the Holocaust still continues in different forms or fashions. ISIS and everything that's happening around here, it's terrible, and you look at the kids that are affected by it, you know, over there, and it's just they're a product of what they're taught and what they're learned, you know, how they learn. So we see it from one side, and they see it from another, and it's important to make sure that people understand that it still happens, and it's still very important for them to stand up and do things. So it's incredibly relevant today, more than people really honestly understand how it is. So.
Oh. What historical significance would your grandfather say?
The significance of it, if he was here, what would you say the significance would be? I think it's very, well, I'll tell you a quick story to tell you the significance, the spread of what happened, you know, the scale of what you know, the result of what happened. Donald Trump has a daughter named Ivanka Trump, who is married to, what the heck is his name? Married to a grandson, the grandson that was actually saved by my grandfather, his grandfather. So, just the scale of how people are, you know, what happened back then, and because of they survived, and the descendants, it's so amazingly real, and people all over the place that I meet and you know, and they come up to me and they go, "Oh, your grandfather saved my grandfather and my grandmother and you know, their family," and it's so widespread, but it's incredible. You know, tens of thousands of people are you know, alive today because of it. So I think that, you know, that really is a relevance in what he would probably, you know, look at it today and go, "Well, it's cool," but would never want the recognition for it though, because he's just not like that. He's not like that part of it, but yeah.
Okay, in the movie Defiance, the Beals group had to move around a lot and make a bunch of new camps. That's true.
Mm-hmm. When we went back in Lithuania and in Poland, to go back, and we got to go see the areas, the Zamlankas, they call them, the huts, the wooden huts that they made. It was very interesting. You couldn't see them they made them on mountains sometimes, and looking down on the mountain, you couldn't see anything because they were like into the mountain. But when you were at the bottom looking up, you could see it was a whole village and stuff, and you had to put it together. You know, it was very interesting to see how they put these things together, and they lived secretly in these huts and fires going, and you know, had the food areas that they had to, you know, put together. So it was just really interesting to see. I don't even think I answered your question. What was the question again?
It was, they moved around.
Yes, they moved around a lot because they had to, at a moment's notice, they had to get up and leave. Mm-hmm. You know, there are times when they heard the Nazis coming, they could hear the dogs, you know, barking, and they would just say, "It's time to go," and they would get up and they'd leave. And you know, they'd have to go through the swamps, like in the movie, and they would have to travel long distances, and the Nazis were afraid to follow them because they kept on going deeper and deeper in the forest, and that's how they had to escape. Mm-hmm. But they would set up these mobile camps everywhere they would go, and at a moment's notice they would have to leave. And we got to go see them with their big holes in the ground. We actually got to go back to the area where, you know, where one of the camps were, and it was just a big empty hole. But you know, part of what I wanted to do someday is go back there and excavate it, which we did at some parts of it. We found some artifacts and rebuild it, and I wanted to, you know, show what a real camp would have been like. But, you know, it would be overseas, you know, it'd be over in Lithuania. I don't know how many people would want to go over and see it, but part of something that I want to do someday is to do that.
What artifacts did you find?
We found pieces of glass in buckets, and we found what do you call it? Stones that were used to make the ovens for bread. Found a lot of glass. We found a lot of spikes and nails that were used to put the Zamlankas together. They found a gun, but they couldn't ship it back over here because it was a gun. And you know, they said that they knew where my grandfather's bunker was, like the commander's bunker, and found some artifacts from there that they have, and that was used in also used in the exhibit that we put together. It's a cool exhibit, but exhibits are very expensive to upkeep, and you know, you actually have to send the truck down to set it up. It's a lot of work. It's not as easy as you would think. It was very difficult to put together too. It was fun. I really enjoyed doing that.
Okay, so in the movie, it shows obviously Tuvia as the leader, but then, so the structure in the movie of the camp was that the brothers led everyone, and they kind of went on all these trips to get food and supplies. Is that true?
Mm-hmm. They did. It was a very structured camp, and my grandfather had different jobs to do there. They had to keep the structure of the camp in order to survive, because they didn't want people to. In the movie, I don't know if you saw that one part where somebody was trying to stand up to my grandfather. I don't think you got to that if you're only halfway.
His brother did. Is that what you mean?
No, that happened in the camp where somebody was trying to. One of the I won't.
We saw the fist fight with his brother and his.
No,
brother.
yeah, but that wasn't it.
Okay.
It came after that. But that too. I mean, it was just they had to keep the structure of the camp in order to survive. And you'll see when you see the rest of the movie, there's some parts to it that are actually true as well. Where, you know, it was you know, truthfully one of the at the end of the war when they were liberated, one of the guys wanted to leave, one of the camp members, and my grandfather was like, nobody's leaving here until I say we're leaving. And he started to walk away, and he shot him, killed him, because he didn't want the structure of the camp to be, you know, you know, something wrong with it. So he wanted to make sure that everybody was going to stick together until he knew it was 100% clear that they were going to survive. So they had to do what they had to do. And you know, there was a lot of true stories that happened out of there that people still think that I can't believe that happened, but it did. You know, and hard to understand still to this day.
So you would say like maintaining the structure was really what allowed them to survive?
I think it was a very big part of it. You can't not make that many people, 1,250 people. Next, you know, I don't know how many people are in your school, but next time you have next time you have a get together at your school, just look around for a minute and figure out how many people are in your cafeteria or whatever, how many hundreds of people, and then think it would be like to have 1,250 people that you needed to keep alive, and you can't do that without not having a structure. It was very, very important to do that. So.
Can I interject here for a second? I want to delve a little more into something that you just talked about, which was these side trips that they had to take to get food and supplies. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious to know how those interactions went with the local Polish or Belarusian farmers and villages. I mean, were they open to having them come and get supplies, or did they have to fight for those things? No, they didn't. You know, it was there were people who were open to giving it, and then there were more people that were not. But the gist of what happened was that they wouldn't go in and take everything. They would go in and take some supplies and come back at another time and take more supplies. But they didn't like it, but they didn't have a choice. You know, they didn't have a choice on either side. They needed to survive, so my grandparents had to do it. Get what they needed. And from a farmer standpoint, they would take stuff, milk or whatever. Food, whatever it might be, and not take everything, but then again take enough and come back again. So it was an ongoing, constant process to feed and to keep people clothed and medicine and that kind of stuff. So it was ongoing. And a lot of people didn't like it all the time, but it was necessary to do. It's hard to feed 1,200 people.
Right.
It's very hard to feed 1,200 people. So,
What would you say was like when they encountered Germans or other Belarusians?
when they encountered them,
Yeah.
just on the road or
On the road
Nazis
or people stumbled upon
there
them?
there are times when they were people stumbled onto the camps. Nazis did, and some of those, when at the end of the war, when they were retreating, when they were liberated and the Nazis were retreating, they stumbled on the camp, and that was one of the worst. You know, a bunch of people got killed, and that was one of the worst days that they had throughout the whole time when they were killed in there. But you know, they wouldn't hesitate to kill somebody if they knew that it was going to jeopardize the rest of the group. It wasn't even a thought. It wasn't. And again, in the movie, you'll see there was one particular scene that they had a choice to, you know, whether to kill this one person or not, and you know, every outcome that happened had another outcome that became of it. So in the scheme of things, when it was very truthful, you have to make decisions that are the big decisions that are gonna affect the group, and not just, you know, what happened right there. So it all depends on who it was and what they were doing, but yeah, I mean, it wasn't you know, they encountered lots of people, you know, very spread out, and so yeah, and a lot of the encounters weren't good, but they had a lot of the, you know, the counterterrorism and espionage type things. They fought a lot against the Nazis, but they fought and then they ran. They fought and then they ran. And there's a lot of side stories, a lot of things that happened that people in Novogrudek, there was the longest escape tunnel was ever built, and the people that escaped from there ended up ran to the forest and met up with their grandfather. So it's a lot of little stories that people don't know quite that happened that are all related, and they ended up, you know, multiple stories that ended up meeting with my grandfather. And it wasn't just the men; it was also the women. There's a story my grandfather and my grandmother told me that my Aunt Sonia and my grandmother were like bandits. They would go out and they'd steal things, and they'd, you know, go to villages and steal food, and furs, whatever they stole. They were the bandits. And the town people came to my grandfather and said, "I don't know what's going on, but there are bandits out there in your group that are taking things from the families and the villagers, and they don't like it." And it turns out it was my grandmother and my aunt that were doing it. So my grandfather's like, you know, "Lily, you have to stop that. You have to stop going out and doing that." So it was very, it was, you know, little stories like that.
So I don't get, if they're close enough to towns to run these raids and get what they need, it's still unfathomable to me how they're managing to escape Nazis with dogs. You know, how...
When you go to the forest, you walk 10 feet into the forest in Lithuania, and you turn around, you can't see. You can't see the you know, it was very thick. So you know, as soon as you got in there, it was like you were lost. And they knew how to, because they grew up there when they were kids. They knew how to navigate the forest really well. It's just like driving in the city, and you know, downtown. First time you're there, you get completely lost. But the more you go there, the more you realize there are markers and things to you. So the Nazis were afraid to go in there because they actually went in and they were afraid because it was dark, it was scary. They didn't know where they were, and they very easy to get lost. A lot of people just wandered out in the forest for days until they haphazardly fell upon my family. You know, they didn't know they were out there. You know, Hitler had a price for my grandfather's head. You know, it was like a ghost. You know, who knew about who he was, but they could never find him.
So he was one of the Nazis' top
Yeah,
wanted
well, he's one of the
people.
one. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely wanted by them. I'm watching this show. It's called it's a Discovery Channel thing about Hitler. They saying that Hitler was still alive after the war.
Right.
Did you watching that?
I haven't, but I've heard of it.
It's an interesting show. I mean, there's no real proof that he died.
Right.
That's what they're saying. These are,
Right.
you know, and then they're following the footsteps. And it's kind of interesting to see where it all leads to. So I don't know. It was kind of cool. So.
Why do you think it's important to share your grandfather's story?
To me, it's incredibly important because I want people to realize that that he made a difference, you know, that they can make a difference. And it's not just the story of people being killed, it was a story of survival, you know, and incredible survival under unimaginable conditions, that these people rose to the occasion and they were able to do things that people didn't think that they could do. And it's about doing things, you know, not doing things that you can't even imagine you could do. You know, and so that's the importance of it, is teaching kids that they can make a difference in life, they can do things. So.
What did the partisans do to resist the Nazis?
There were many different forms of resistance. There was resistance that you could fight. There was resistance that you could practice religion. There was a resistance that you could live. So there's different forms of resistance that when you talk about. And it's not just the fighting part of it. It's just, you know, that they were able to live their lives by running away from the Nazis. And funny enough, coincidentally, when they were liberated, they didn't know what to do. They were free to go, but they didn't know where to go to. They had no families, they had no money, they had no clothing, they had nothing. Everything was taken away from them. So even though they were liberated, then all of a sudden they're like, what are we supposed to do now? At least when they were running from them and surviving, they had a purpose. The purpose was to live. And once they were liberated, they didn't know what to do. And at that point, that was when my grandfather really had to, you know, say, okay, you need to stick close and we'll figure this out. And that's what ended up happening.
And what did they do?
They, once they were liberated, they kind of disbanded, and people walked to different places. My grandfather went to Israel. People stayed in Belarus and Poland. Some people went to the United States. Some people, France, you know, all over the place. They kind of disbanded all over. Every corner of this earth, there's people, the descendants, family.
Then what was life like for your grandfather in Israel?
He was a taxi driver.
He was in Israel first?
Yeah. He went from being this commander in the force to being a taxi driver in Israel. So it was interesting for him to go from one extreme to the other. They gave him a license to, you know, drive. He had to learn how to drive and whatever was in there. But it was the same thing, you know. Came to the United States, and you know, people would just not know what he did and who he was. He was just like a regular person, but this incredible background of things that he did. You'd never know it. You never know it. So it was a big change.
What would you say life was like in Poland during the Holocaust? Not necessarily in.
It was a hard life. It was lots of persecution. It was hard to. It was very difficult. If you go back there now, it's almost the same way. I mean, aside from all the anti-Semitism, there's still some around there, but people haven't changed there in 70 years. I mean, I saw the neighbors of my grandparents when we went back there in 2007. They were still wearing the same clothes that they wore back in the 1940s. You know, so it really hasn't. You know, different environment, but I think that a lot of it is still the same. I mean, I think it's old school. Things like that are so far behind in life that it's kind of interesting. We live in a place here that's unbelievable. It's compared to that, you know. So,
would you say that your grandfather intended to only save people, or he also like made an effort to try to find Nazis and kill them and take their weapons?
A little bit of both. My grandfather's main priority in life was to save people. Zush's priority in life was to kill Germans. They had different ideas about what to do, but my grandfather specifically was just all about saving, because he didn't know how many people were left. They were cut off. Hitler was a madman, but he was very smart. He killed all the smart people, all the smart Jews. So there weren't anybody left to think that You know, it was a one-way door. People would come in, they would never come out. So one of the other things that my family is doing is one of the family members restores Holocaust violins, and they take those violins and they perform. They perform all over the world, and it's just in a memory of what happened. One of the violins was from Auschwitz. You know, they had the story behind that. And it's those kinds of things that tell stories. Those inanimate objects that tell these stories about people that were, you know, if they could talk, you know, the things that they would say. But they talk with music. You know, it's just little things like that. And then again, there's little finger things that to keep the stories alive. And they all come back to the same thing. You know, they all do the same thing.
I'm out of questions.
Well, I have a bunch. But let me restart for another
Okay.
1 second.